This is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culture Ford. Bird Culture Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoke and Grayson Grundhafer.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into a brand new edition of the Bearcast on Sic'Em 365 Sports. We come to you following the first live action, the first real game of the 2022 season. The Baylor Bears, number 10 team in the country, defeat the Albany Great Danes last Saturday at McLean Stadium 69-10. They empty the benches. They get contributions from all over, and they had a lot of good things to say about it afterwards. Craig Smoke, Sic'Em 365 Radio, 365 Sports host, also Sic'Em 365 writer, joined as always by Grayson Grundhafer, Director of Broadcasting, also team and recruiting reporter for Sic'Em 365. And Grayson, we're going to dive into it, spend a little bit of time on Albany, and obviously look ahead to what is a big ramp-up in competition versus BYU. But first things first, one game under the belt. How do you think the opening weekend went on your end?
Yeah, I mean, getting to watch football is always a positive and a blessing. And so, getting to go into McLean Stadium and actually see some football be played and get to talk about football, I think is really cool. And, Baylor took care of business as everyone thought they would. It really wasn't a competitive game, but we got to see some young guys get in there. And I always find that to be the most interesting part of those week one games when you're playing a team that's not very good. You get to see some young guys get in and contribute who you probably won't get to see much throughout the year. There are a few that will, but for the most part, you don't get to see all of them. So in general, Baylor played really well. I felt like they looked like an improved team, and overall, I thought game day atmosphere was awesome. I felt like the place was rocking. People were excited. And when you get those things all together, it ends up being a great weekend.
Yeah, I thought the game day presentation was nice. I'm not going to pick it apart, to every little level like, regular season ticket holders will. As you know, people let their grievances be known, but I thought the new DJ was pretty good, like as far as, weaving in and out of the game and not being kind of herky-jerky. Now, there were some conflicts with the band, as people pointed out, but you can work that out. But I thought other than that, it's like, too much energy? Well, that's better than having, the wrong kind of lack of energy. So that was evident. That was notable. I thought just overall the presentation seemed pretty smooth just in terms of, again, just the entire sort of game atmosphere with the music, with the berm looked awesome. I mean, that's becoming a really cool thing week in and week out. And yeah, just obviously everybody's really there for the game. And that was one where I've said it like 5 times already this week, but you weren't sweating it unless you were just sweating outside because you were sitting there watching the game. But outside of that, you had little to nothing to worry about. And man, that is kind of refreshing every once in a while to just go to a game, watch the team you like, just win with ease and send the other team packing and then go about your business and get ready for the next one. And that's kind of how week one went, and I think it was pretty simple and pretty straightforward and pretty successful. But now, obviously, a whole different ball game coming up this Saturday. So let's get into Albany. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the Great Danes, with all due respect. That's just the kind of game that it was. Blake Shapen making his first start, like everybody this year, but, his first start since the Big 12 championship game, which was only his second start ever. So his third career outing as QB1, 17-20, 214 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a rushing touchdown as well. He went out there and pretty much just, flashed some of the skills that, has the coaches excited, has people excited. We saw some deep balls, saw him, hit Monterey Baldwin early on, saw him hit Hal Presley early on. Shapen looked sharp, looked like the man, and I think outside of just, a couple of licks that he took from either not sliding or from a late hit, pretty much everything you wanted to see from your QB1 without, emptying the magazine, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the hits that he took weren't great, for sure. He got sacked a couple times as well, but in general, I felt like it was a pretty clean game for him. He was the highest-graded quarterback on 10-plus yard throws, according to PFF, so that's pretty cool to see, the downfield throws that were kind of a problem for Baylor a year ago. They didn't create a ton of explosive plays in the passing game, and Shapen immediately addressed that. You know what I mean? You look at kind of the throws that he made to Monterey and Hal Presley. I mean, those were dimes for touchdowns, and they were deep throws as well. So I came away very impressed with him. Now, again, if you look at those throws, guys were very open in this game. Guys were creating a ton of separation. But we'll see if they're able to do that on the road at BYU, because the tighter the windows get, the more I'm a little bit nervous about, taking care of the football and about being able to make throws that are kind of game planned instead of off schedule throws. Now, there's a better chance that Chapin makes off-schedule plays than Gary did a year ago, because we've seen it. We saw it in the spring game. We've seen it multiple times, but I do think that it's still something we need to see more of, right? And more consistently, how teams game plan for Chapin and this offense. But yes, I felt in general like he played really well, and Kyron Drones off the bench played extremely well. Also, 5 of 7, 100 yards. He connected with Jalen Ellis on a 50-yard throw. So I felt like both quarterbacks played well, and I got a lot more confident in Kyron Drones after seeing him than I was initially going into the year.
Rushing-wise, let's start there. The young freshman, the true freshman, Richard Reese, leads the team in rushing, 62 carries on 9 yards, had a couple of touchdowns as well. You see why there's the Squirrel Williams comparisons. Very similar looking just in terms of size, maybe a bit sturdier though, but definitely a little bit of that talent was flashed in front of everybody's eyes, and I think we could expect to see a lot more of him as the season progresses. Quaylon Jones was running hard, 6 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown for him. Monterey Baldwin had a play very reminiscent to the Sugar Bowl. Was just running free in the open field, coming around end, and gets his first rushing touchdown of the year. Squirrel Williams, wasn't expecting him to necessarily play. He gets a rushing touchdown. Only 3 carries for Squirrel for 13 yards, but he did have a touchdown amidst that. And then both quarterbacks, Chapin and Drones, with keepers for scores. So 7 rushing touchdowns, 259 yards on 41 carries. 7 touchdowns, you're like, ooh, big-eyed. Wow, that's incredible. It was a little bit more of a struggle for them to run the ball. They didn't just necessarily, name their yardage like you thought that they could probably against a team like Albany. So that is something that I think come out of this game people were maybe not concerned about, but are a little curious as to, okay, why did we not look as dominant as I thought we would? Or why didn't we rack up 400 yards on 41 carries? So maybe that's one area you go like, okay, need a little tweak in there. But good to see them basically empty the bench with everybody. And, Tay McWilliams was a starter, 12 carries, 45 yards. He was really one of the only guys to not find the end zone. But Richard Reese, I thought, looked good. Quaylon Jones, like I said, ran hard, and ultimately they got what they needed to, but definitely not going to be the best performance out of the backfield we see this year, and it will need to be, one of the they'll need a bigger performance at some point down the line.
Yeah, and I also felt like that was probably play calling and game planning.
Sure.
I think this was a lot of they could have ran more play action. Instead, they just decided to hand the ball off, just because you're trying to get the game over with. You're not trying to run up the score on anybody. And also you don't want to show too much. And so I think that was a part of it. So, getting stuffed on 4th and 1, not great. But on the flip side, it's one of those things where we'll take that, and then we'll just correct it next week when we run play action out of that and then get a first down. So I think there is some gamesmanship being played there as well. You mentioned the Monterey Baldwin touchdown. Excellent block by Tay McWilliams. I mean, he is the reason that play was that play. Like, he made a sensational block. 12 of 45. I felt like in general from the running backs, it's what I expected. Tay McWilliams, the lead ball carrier, Richard Reese and Quaylon Jones, 2 guys who emerged in fall camp as we talked about. They came out, played extremely well. And then Squirrel, when he got in there, he was effective. He just didn't play a ton. But I think he'll play a lot more next week. So in general, like you said, yeah, maybe there were a couple issues here and there, but in general, I think this team's going to be very effective running the football. And once they get Khalil Keith back, they'll take another step in the right direction.
Yeah, and to be very clear, not making any rash judgments or sweeping observations after the game against Albany. I mean, that's just it was what it was, and they took care of the business the way they needed to. You expect the first game of the year is going to be little things here and there, and also, not showing your full array of what's at your disposal. It's game number 1. Receiving-wise, they had over 300 yards through the air as both Blake Chapin and Kyron Drones were able to wing it a little bit. As I mentioned, Chapin, 214 yards. Drones flat 100 yards on the day. Did not have any passing touchdowns like Chapin did, but did have the running touchdown that we mentioned, and he did look good. But Monterey Baldwin, 84 yards and a touchdown. Hal Presley, a touchdown, 56 yards receiving for him on three catches. Jalen Ellis had a late one. He had one ball go his way. It was late, like it almost always is. If we do mention him, it's late in the game. 50 yards on one touch. I thought that Dave Aranda's quote about him was very, very telling yesterday during the press conference when he was kind of running down what he saw from the wide receiver group. We can get to that in a moment. Ben Sims caught a handful of balls for 37 yards. We're going to see way more of him moving forward. Drake Dabney caught up one. Saw Seth Jones catch a couple passes. Tay McWilliams caught some balls out of the backfield. Armani Winfield's first career catch goes for 10 yards. And then Quaylon Jones even had a reception as well. So 22 receptions for 314 yards, 2 TDs to ball went into Presley. And that was just like kind of your generic offensive stats. But scoring-wise in that game, it was the passing game that got things just lit right from the very beginning. And that was Shape and finding Baldwin pretty much right out of the gates for a 47-yard score. You had the fun Craig Williams touchdown that followed that shortly thereafter. And then Gavin Holmes with the exceptional 72-yard punt return. That was your first quarter of scoring for the Bears. So they got offense via the pass game and the running game, plus special teams via punt returns, all contributing to scores to make it 21-7. Because Albany did find their way into the end zone in that first quarter. I think that whatever bets were out there, they had to have upset some folks, in the betting market, because a lot of people not expecting them to pass like 3 points in the game. Yet they were able to, after that fourth down stop that you mentioned earlier, turn right around and a couple plays later score. So by the end of the first quarter, it's 21-7. Second quarter, another big pass, 38 yards to Hal Presley, and then Blake Shapen with the quarterback carry. So it was 35-7 at halftime, and you'd seen a little bit of the passing game. You'd seen them kind of take control at that point, and I think by halftime everybody was feeling pretty good and excited to see a Hal Presley and a Squirrel Williams and a Gavin Holmes out there. Is kind of the comeback kid story in so many ways.
Yeah, and I think looking at that wide receiver position, as you mentioned, and just kind of looking at the production, it was very similar to running backs. It was kind of what we expected, right? You got Monterey and Hal Presley being the dynamic duo that they are. I think they're going to be the two leading receivers for this team, and Ben Sims with 5 catches. Obviously, he's going to be extremely targeted as well. So those 3 guys, and then it's like, okay, but who else? Jalen Ellis and Drake Dabney, both of their receptions came with Kyron Drones. Seth Jones, one of his best catch of the day came with Kyron Drones as well. So they're going to need to kind of round out that receiving core a little bit more, which is kind of what you mentioned. Jalen Ellis, Dave Aranda talked about him as a guy that they kind of need to step up, and they want him to continue to get healthy because his speed is
quote.
Yeah, his speed's a game changer. So I think his quote, but remember, when I write these down, it's more note style as opposed to exact quotes. But he says he's always fighting an injury. I think he mentioned ankle and knee. But to get him running like that is good for our future. And I think that's a telling sign that they want his speed on the field and that they need his speed on the field. He also mentioned Seth Jones blocked well, doing little things, and that he's emerging as well. So we didn't see a lot of that, but we did see Jalen Ellis making a big impact in this game on one play. Now, can he do that with the starters? That's to be determined.
Yeah, he said, I think that I think he's emerging, talking about Seth Jones. To have Jalen catch that ball, that was really neat. I think he's one that's always fighting something, some type of ankle injury or knee injury, and to be able to get him running like that, it's good for the future. That's basically what you said, but he's always fighting something. That was, it's annoying. Like, you're always banged up with some injury, and it's not always his fault, but you just kind of want to finally at this point, like, he's a junior now, right? Yeah. You need to see him out there and contributing, and so to see him catch that ball at the end was certainly a good sign. So just totally dominant in the first half. It was 35-7. Baylor scored at least 2 touchdowns in every quarter of this ball game. So by halftime, it was just a question of, okay, you'd seen all these highlights. Like, what more were you going to see in the second half? Who are you going to see in the second half? How long was Blake Shapen going to be out there? Those kinds of questions. Third quarter, Monterey Baldwin's just Mr. Tone Setter because he had the big touchdown to start the game, and then he did it through the ground game to start the second half. A 50-yard run again. That was the callback almost to the Sugar Bowl, just exploding around the edge of the offense and just finding a bunch of green and running towards the end zone. 50 yards for Baldwin. So Baylor goes up 42-7 pretty early on in the second half. Albany, to their credit, man, got a field goal, tacked on another 3 points, 25-yarder. So 11 play, 67-yard drive for the Great Danes that lasted over 5 minutes. So at that point, the game wasn't out of reach, but it was like, how many points are they going to find a way to score in this game? So it was 42-10 at that point, and they were done scoring. that was it. But you know what? They exceeded expectations, I think, because after that, Kyron Drones called his own number, the 9-yard touchdown run. Late in the third quarter, it was 49-10, and then the fourth quarter was basically just the running game show and the Richard Reese show, as Richard Reese, the true freshman running back, caps off a 7-play, 61-yard drive with a 1-yard touchdown, the first of his career. Just a few minutes later, 7-yard run caps off a very short 4-play drive to make it 63-10. So back-to-back touchdown runs for Richard Reese, and then Quaylon Jones got in on the action to cap it off, a 27-yard run to make it 69-10. And then John Mayers misses the extra point, and instead of it being a nice round 70, it was 69-10, and that was all she wrote. So special teams, obviously missed extra point, but had the big punt return, and I think everything else was pretty much smooth from all indications. I'm sure they've broken it down to a
and
much,
they were rotating kickers.
Yeah, to a much deeper degree. I don't think that too many were focused in all that much on the special teams aspect of it, but looked okay there. Defensively, I don't think we saw a ton necessarily, and offensively had to work some things out. Offensive line could certainly be a bit sharper, and will have to be this week. Need those receivers to keep coming along and young playmakers, but for a game against a team that you're expected to beat by 7 touchdowns, I thought it was pretty well executed and pretty entertaining.
Yeah, and you mentioned that field goal that Albany had in the middle of the third quarter. Not only did they not score again after that, they didn't get another first down the rest of the game. So, I mean, Baylor definitely turned that page.
It's time to
quick.
end this. Yeah.
And they kept giving up plays, and they were done with that after that field goal. So, a couple things on the defensive side that I want to bring up. If you watch the game, Baylor was running a whole lot of the 2 jacks on the field, line up a ton. So you saw Bryson Jackson and Garmin Randolph lining up on the end with 2 down linemen, and I felt like that was really effective. And that's something that we expected to see this year, but it was really cool to see it finally on the field. Lots of speed there, lots of dynamic playmaking. Bryson Jackson forcing the turnover early in the game as well. So I was curious to see how they would work that in, and they didn't just work it in. They were using that a ton in this football game. A couple other takeaways. Tyrone Brown is the backup at Mike, and Will Williams is the backup at Will linebacker. So Josh White looking like he's on the outside looking in currently. Played a lot on special teams, but seems to be behind those two at the linebacker position. We saw Matt Jones leave. I don't know if we've gotten an update on him, but he was walking around fine. So
afterwards, Aranda said there was no injuries, but we know that they're not necessarily the most open with that.
Yeah, and he was, he went to the sideline, was kind of upset, but it maybe was just a stinger of some kind. He was walking around fine, so I'm guessing he's okay.
It's true. We also saw TCU's quarterback act like he had torn every ACL known to man, and it turns out he's going to be out for like a week. Right. So, who knows what Matt Jones was feeling.
Yeah, and then in the secondary, no Christian Morgan, but Dave Aranda did say they expect to get him back this week. Very curious to see how that unfolds. We saw a lot of Devin Bobby coming in and subbing in for Devin Lemire. We saw, some Mike Harris as well. And Alfonso Allen, who had a sack in this game as well. Yeah. He looked like a heat-seeking missile on that sack, so he looks like a guy who could play, but I'm curious if they shorten that group a little bit this week to just the 4 primary guys, or if they continue to mix in the Devin Bobby, the Mike Harris, and the Alfonso Allen once Christian Morgan is back. That'll be something to keep an eye on. But overall, I felt like they played pretty well in the secondary outside of Lorando Johnson getting beat on that touchdown. And I believe it was Devin Neal who got beat by one of the tight ends on what was like maybe a 25-yard throw as well. But there weren't a ton of big plays given up by the secondary, at least to my eye.
And offensively, they made a few big plays. So that was good to see. Certainly looked explosive with Monterey Baldwin. And they'll just have to continue, polishing that offense. And just as game number 1. So excited to see how they now perform on the road, because that's what now lies ahead. Top 10 team, 1-0 now, but all offseason, Arena's been talking about buffaloes and storms and running into storms and all these different ways that he's basically said, like, we're going to have to be better on the road. We're going to have to win on the road. And in order to find the success we did last year, or to just forget last year, be the team that this team can be, we got to go perform well on the road. Like, that has been something he has hammered home constantly, no matter what phase of coverage we're talking about, whether it was directly after the season wrapped up last year and it was like, signing day time conversations, or it was when spring ball opened up, or it was post spring ball or Big 12 media days. Fast forward into fall camp, like, it's been constant. And now here we are. And this in particular seems like the storm that he's been really preaching the most about, because it's the first one. And it's, a little bit unfamiliar because it's not a Big 12 team just yet. And there is that familiarity with Kalani Sitake and all that they do out there with that program, thanks to, obviously having Eric Mateos and Jeff Grimes, but not to mention a couple Utah natives that they know that program very well, were recruited by that program, like a Siaki Ika or George Maye. So there's a lot of familiarity, that back and forth, and so I think that respect level is so high. You add in the road atmosphere, and yeah, this is a serious business trip coming up this weekend, which leads us into BYU, who debuted last week with a nice, comfortable, relatively stress-free on their end as well, win over Gary Bohannon in South Florida. Gary Bohannon, former Baylor quarterback. Not a great weekend for former Baylor quarterbacks. Charlie Brewer suits up for Liberty, gets hurt early. He's going to miss like 2 months with an injury. Gary Bohannon, not hurt to my knowledge, but just on a team that's not very good at all and is going to struggle mightily. And Jeff Scott's probably going to be fired before the year is over with if they continue on the trajectory of week number 1. I'm not surprised. I just hate it for Gary because I don't see a whole lot of improvement coming their way anytime soon.
Especially with the defense giving up 8.5 yards per carry. They were terrible.
They're going to have a new coach soon.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate, but that's what BYU was faced with in week number 1. They were able to walk out of that with the win. They're number 25 in the country, so this is a top 25 matchup, and excited about that. But 50-21 was the final score. They did win on the road in Tampa. Gary Bohannon, just 17 of 30 for 172 yards, averaged less than 6 yards per pass, no touchdowns, 1 interception. He had a QBR of 7.2, so just a bad day. But
they got payback. Definitely. They got payback.
Oh, yeah, for last year,
sure.
No doubt about it. USF just runs for slightly over 100 yards, throws for less than 175. So BYU is going to face a much tougher challenge this week, and so is Baylor. And so that's what's going to be interesting, is both teams are coming off of just handling their business. Both are confident. BYU has the home edge. But outside of that, it's all a guessing game on how this one's going to shake out, Grayson. What we do know, BYU comes back loaded with talent. Jaron Hall at quarterback, a good player. Dave Aranda made particular mention of him. No Tyler Algier in the backfield this year. He's off to the NFL now, but they did bring in the transfer in Christopher Brooks, who had 135 yards and a score last week. You have the big-time wide receiver in Puka Nacua, who was just a pest last year against Baylor. He has been kind of on the injury report off and on, was hurt prior to week 1, ended up playing last week, but still doesn't seem to be 100%.
He was 100%. He looked amazing when he was on the field, but then he left the game and was on crutches.
He's back to not 100%.
Yeah, right.
So that's a huge question mark for them if he can or can't go. He was somewhat doubtful last week, but played like you said. So now doubtful because he may have re-aggravated something or re-injured something, but that's certainly a player to keep an eye on. But he had just one catch last week, but he did get into the running game, a couple of rushing touchdowns, 76 yards on just 3 carries, so you got to be aware of him. And there's a bunch of other guys as well, but those are some familiar names from last season that will certainly play some type of role in the game this week, you would think.
Yeah, and also Gunnar Romney, who didn't play last week, but Kalani Sitake said that he's close to coming back. Now, does that mean he's close enough that he's going to play this weekend? We will see on that.
I would assume so.
I think
just because if you're going to hold the guy for a game, it'd probably be to hold him for this game.
And
to
he
play in
did
this game.
he also said on Puka it was precautionary that they took him out and that he could have come back in the game. So, again, I think both are going to play. Now,
yeah, I'd assume so.
Play versus being 100% are two totally different things. So we'll see how they look in this game. That would be a huge loss for them if those guys don't play. You mentioned the Cal transfer, Christopher Brooks. He's a very good running back. Very, very good. And they also have Lopini Katoa, who was on the team last year, who ran as Tyler Allgeier's backup. So they have a very good run game. Dave Aranda mentioned they're going to want to run the football. They averaged 8.5 yards per carry against South Florida. It all starts with the run for them. But make no mistake, this is a dynamic passing offense. Jaren Hall, very, very good player. Another mobile quarterback that Baylor's going to have to play against, which they didn't look great tackling the quarterback position in this first game against Albany. They're going to have to shore that up a little bit against Jaren Hall. And I think the biggest kind of my thought process on it is I think Baylor's going to be able to somewhat take away the run game. But where I'm fascinated is in the passing game. If Baylor's secondary, these cornerbacks, the safeties who we talked about all offseason as they've made big strides, but you never know what they're going to look like when they face an elite offense. And BYU has an elite offense, and they're going to take shots. They're going to run play action. They're going to create misdirection. They're going to confuse the secondary at times. And so it's a matter of how they respond and how they react. I'm just kind of so intrigued by these cornerbacks, Lorando Johnson, Mark Milton, Tevin Williams off the bench, A.J. McCarty, and then the safeties, Devin Bobby, Devin Neal, Devin Lemire, how they respond to this passing attack that they're going to see on Saturday, I think is going to be the key to the whole game.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating early season matchup. I mean, on paper, I go with Baylor, and I feel very strongly about that. But you throw in the wild card of just a very inexperienced secondary and some young guys going into what's going to be a heated environment for the first time. It's only week 2. And they're going to be playing against some grown men, in comparison. So, BYU last weekend rushed for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, primarily coming from Brooks and Nakua. And then through the air, Jaren Hall helped contribute 261 yards and 2 scores. So a lot of receivers involved, 10-plus receivers getting their hands on at least one pass last week. So wonder how much they'll get off the bench this week. But, yeah, that offense is something that's going to be a real challenge for this Baylor defense and Ron Roberts and company.
Yeah, I'm very curious, though, because last year Baylor ran for 303 yards on BYU. And I know the final score was 38-24. They scored late. That game was really a 20-point difference. Baylor really dominated that game, and both teams are returning so much on the offensive and defensive lines. It really just makes me sit there and question, why shouldn't Baylor be able to go do that? Why shouldn't they be able to do the exact same thing they did a year ago and not have too many issues with it? But I think it's the road environment that is really changing some things, because if you look at Baylor's schedule last year, you ready for their road wins? At Texas State, 29-20. At Kansas, 45-7. Then you got to scroll all the way down.
2 of maybe 1 and 2 as far as the worst programs in the country over the last couple of years.
Right, and then at Kansas State at the end of the year, 20-10. Those were their only road wins a year ago. That's just crazy to me. They lost at Oklahoma State 24-14. They lost at TCU 30-28. That's what they've done on the road. And I know they were so good last year, went 12-2, but they didn't do a whole lot on the road at all. And I know they won neutral site games in the Big 12 Championship and Sugar Bowl, but it's very different winning a neutral site game versus going and winning on the road. Baylor has a lot to prove in this game from that aspect.
Yes, they do. Right now, looks like BYU almost 4-point favorites.
Yep.
It's only Tuesday, so we'll see how that. I would expect that to inch closer towards Baylor.
It's been growing. It was
really?
2.5. It's been growing. It went up to 3 and then 3.5. It's been trending in the direction that it might close at 4 or 4.5 for BYU, which I have found very, very interesting.
Yeah, me too. That would the only reason I would think in line with that would be there's just something that we're not aware of, like some bugaboo that's hiding in the closet, that's going to come out and scare Baylor when they arrive in Provo or something that's going to completely rattle them.
Road 9-15 game.
Yeah,
Maybe
even then though, I still don't think that. I still like Baylor's odds, but yeah, I understand why there's cause for concern, and I definitely am not thinking that they're going to just walk in there and handle their business and walk out with no issues. I think that it's going to be a really tough environment, and I think that if they earn a win, it's going to be done in very stressful, grueling fashion. They're going to walk out and feel like they were just in a war and hopefully come out the victors. But, this is not going to be an easy contest this weekend. And if it turns out to be for Baylor, then I think that bodes obviously incredibly well for the rest of the way, because this is kind of that it's week 2. We don't overreact over week 1, but this does kind of set the table for the year. Like this game does. It's that, like, okay, there's that unbeaten path that you want to stay on, and then there's that, okay, what do you do if you're 1-1 after just 2 games? Like that completely resets the line of thinking as far as, the outside and looking at their season and their path and everything. Can ill afford with a road-heavy schedule like this to drop the very first road game out of the gates.
Right, you become Utah, who lost the first game of the year, and everyone's sitting there going like, well, their season's over. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying it is over, but I'm just saying really like people sit there and go, oh, well, you lost the first game, you're going to have to win 12 in a row.
Wow, that playoff's really cool. One weekend, we're already saying, oh, season's over with. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, but it's one of those things with the Pac-12 and the state of it that it is very tough to recover from an early season loss. So we'll see if Baylor can avoid that. I think the more that I look at this game, the more it reminds me of last year's game, where it's like BYU does very similar things to Baylor, but Baylor's just better at them. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I do think the road environment plays a factor, and I do think BYU is going to be excited for this game, but I also think Baylor's going to be excited for this game. You got guys going home. You got a new offense that looks just far more explosive, and I think they're going to take advantages when they can in the passing game. And I think Blake Shapen's going to show the country a little bit more of kind of why Baylor made that move from Gary Bohannon to him in the offseason.
Yep, it is a big-time challenge, but one that they seem ready for, and one that they, seem pretty good. Seem to be pretty good standing coming out of game number 1 as far as just health and confidence and focus and all those types of things. And again, this has been a game that in so many ways Dave Aranda's been preparing them for the entire offseason. Yeah. Storms, Buffaloes, all that goes back to what they're now getting ready for this week. So I think preparation-wise, they'll be in a good place, but you just never know with young people, inexperienced, going out on the road in a hostile environment and just what that can do, and Big Mo and how that swings. So I think that's going to be obviously a big part of the story this weekend. So there's BYU. I guess what do we need to do here? We got Big 12 predictions at the end. We already ready for Mailbag? Let's get into the Mailbag. So, yeah. Go ahead and fire that first one off there, Grayson.
Okay, the first question from the bare minimum, is BYU better than Albany? Yes.
Yes.
They're probably 50 points better than Albany.
Yeah, probably somewhere in there. I mean, I think it would be a similar result if they were to line up like Baylor did last week against Albany. I think you'd see, I don't know about like a 7-touchdown spread, but somewhere in that vicinity, absolutely. I think you'd see something similar to that. So, yes, big ramp up in competition, bare minimum. Thank you for that question. A-Bear 2. There's an ongoing debate on 365 about Aranda's penchant for following the statistics or formula on going for it on fourth, even on his own side of the field. I know context matters as to whether it is the last 2 minutes and the score, but generally, what are your thoughts? And you loosely touched on this earlier. Albany's 1 touchdown drive was, a couple plays following a big fourth down stand for them. Baylor deep in their own territory, like around the 30, right? Wasn't it? Ends up going for it. And early on in that game, get absolutely stuffed. And a couple plays later, touchdown, Great Danes. So that was certainly, when you talk about the fourth down calls and the rolling of the dice, that's the one that stands out from week number 1. But what do you think generally about Dave Aranda's penchant for going for it on fourth down?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where hindsight usually tells the story, which is a problem. But like last year when they were playing Oklahoma State, there was one that just stands out in my mind. I think they were on their own 35, and instead of punting and driving Oklahoma State, deep into their territory and being able to get the ball back rather quickly because the defense was playing so good, they elected to go for it. And that was a mistake. It gave up points. And I just think in general, there are times where it's good and times where it's bad. And so that makes it hard to kind of generally talk about on a without going case by case. But I would say that in general, I'm in favor of going for it. I think analytics make a lot of sense in this department. And I think for the most part, Dave Aranda and Jeff Grimes have really taken advantage of the analytics in a favorable way. But at times it has bit them a little bit. And so I like the aggressive mindset, but I would also say in some situations, I definitely don't agree with it. And that Oklahoma State one is the biggest one that stands out in my mind. I'm trying to think. I think there was one against BYU last year where they went for it and Gary threw an interception on like the 1 yard line. looking for Ben Sims.
I think you're right.
And you could have just taken the field goal there early in the game. There are just times where I kind of look at it and go, maybe we just take 3 points. And maybe just move on from there. But at other times, I understand it.
He seems bulletproof, but even he's capable of making the wrong choice, and even the numbers can lie sometimes. Yeah. And, I did think that was a situation last weekend where I was like, man, you're a little deep in your – like, I understand, but you are a little deep in your own territory. Like, you're definitely not doing this against probably anybody else left on your schedule.
But they did against Oklahoma State.
I know, it's just like, I know. I just – after that last week, I don't know. I think that's probably the last time we're going to see maybe a gamble like that, in the near future.
We'll see.
Might
happen this weekend.
It might, and it might go the same way, and it might blow up, and it might be something we're talking about, in a bad way.
Or it might be an Abram Smith 50. Well, squirrel now, but against Oklahoma State, 4th and 2, they ran the toss play. Abram Smith 50-yard touchdown. So it's just one of those things where it's all about hindsight, and that's the problem. That's the problem with it.
Scotty B, the Baylor King. What is the ideal number of passing yards the Baylor defense allows to give the best chance to win? Jaron Hall had close to 400 yards last year passing the football. So, they won that game with relative ease, and he threw for a lot. So, I don't know. Keep him under 400. That would be a good start. I do think if you get past 400, then we're starting to get into yards where scores will have to be occurring at some rate. But I don't have an ideal number in mind. I guess sub 400 certainly, though, would be a good start.
Yeah, so he threw for 342 yards last year, and he also ran for, I believe he had a huge rush, didn't he?
It seems like he did.
Yeah, he had the long run. So he was 8. This is a funny stat. He was 8 for 25 yards and a touchdown, but his long was 56 yards. Yeah. So he lost just on those other 7 carries, he lost 30 yards because it was sacks. Baylor had 5 sacks in that game. I expect more of the same in that department. But as far as passing the ball, he had a 95.6 QBR in that game. He was balling in that game for BYU. I think, if you can keep him below, honestly, I think it needs to be more like, 320. They need to keep him, below 320. If he starts getting up into that 375 on the road in Provo, that's going to be a big problem for Baylor, I think, especially if they're taking shots deep and those turn into touchdowns. That could be a big problem. So I'll put 320 as a number where I'm like, Baylor needs to keep him below that.
Yeah, that seems like a safe number there. Scotty B also asked, surprised College Game Day won't be at BYU this week. I am a little, but I know there was an incident recently with an alleged racial slur at their volleyball game against Duke. I'm not surprised because Texas-Alabama's this week, for one, and there's some other good games as well. So, no, I'm not surprised that Provo wasn't on the top of the list. I certainly don't know that because that happened so closely, date-wise, I don't know that had any impact because I feel like you would have already had to have set a lot of that up. But if it did, I wouldn't, also be shocked by that because that was a story involving their volleyball team a week or so ago where a black player for Duke was apparently getting heckled pretty openly by a BYU fan, and the way it was portrayed, and I don't know, I wasn't there, was that nobody really stepped in to stop it, the harassment, and it just kind of went on. And when I read that story, I was like, there's no way that happened the way that it was outlined, right? People just sat there and let that occur. And so I don't really know what happened ultimately. I do know Don Staley in South Carolina refused to go play there. And so there was some fallout from it, and definitely not a good look for BYU. But I don't know that I would say that's why College Game Day is not there. But who knows? Might have contributed.
Yeah, I think ESPN would be lying if they said that this Alabama-Texas matchup wasn't already going to be the game day spot before the season.
Sure, exactly.
It didn't matter. Unless Texas went out and lost to UL Monroe, this was going to be the College Game Day choice, and that's fine.
Because they don't always care about who's the best. They care about the most money and the numbers, and that's all. When you really think about it and you ask these questions about conferences and TV games and ESPN and all that, it's just money and numbers, and that's why you could beat Texas or you could be Alabama. You could go over for 10 years straight, and your numbers will drop, but ultimately win a couple games and fire up the band, and the juggernaut moves along, and the cash cow continues.
But I was told late night is all that matters, and so that's why I was thinking, it could be BYU and Baylor because it's late night, right?
Yeah, that late night window. That's all that the college TV operators want is that big late night window.
Apparently. So anyways, I think for Baylor going forward, though, they do have the Oklahoma State game on October 1st, and I think that's a good chance that they get game day. I'm not saying they for sure will, because I believe NC State plays Clemson that weekend.
NC State might and Clemson might. Both of them, no knee jerk, but that was not a good showing for those two ACC teams this week.
Yeah, and Clemson plays Wake Forest the week before, and I have a hunch that could be Sam Hartman's return, and Wake could be undefeated at that point, so maybe they get it the week before, and then I don't think Bama will get it that weekend because they already just got it. So October 1st is the one that I'm circling as a potential college game day for Baylor.
And yes, I know that both teams won, NC State and Clemson, but it just wasn't very pretty, is what I'm getting at. For
NC State especially, oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, not a great game for Devin Leary or the Wolfpack in general. They have expectations, so don't roll with them when they have expectations is kind of the theme around NC State that I've picked up on. And also with Clemson, I mean, it's just that was obviously a preseason ranking that some people seem to put a lot of weight on.
Cade Klubnik needs to be their quarterback.
But yeah, the DJU is just not the same kind of machine, smooth operating machine that it has been the last few years. Like, it looks like a team who's lost a lot of major parts to the machine over the last couple seasons, whether that be coaching or players or whatever. It's like a team with a bunch of talent, but like the fit and flow of it all, I don't really see it right now. But yeah, Cade Klubnik came in and looked good there at the end. But yeah, we'll see on the ACC and how that sort of shakes out, because some of their big competitors did not look great in week one. But again, it's only week number one. So Dak JD90 watching Drones play, although against bad competition, I think it'd be a shame having him transfer, as I see a lot of potential there. You would think he played baseball with the fastball he throws. Do you think he sticks around after this year and makes it a 3-quarterback competition when Novosad comes in? Or do you think he transfers to a less competitive quarterback room where he will start?
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate on anything like that. I don't see the need to do that. He played very well, and he looked like a guy who's improved a lot, and that's all you can hope for. And I think right now he's the second best quarterback on Baylor's roster, and we'll see what happens in the coming years. If he continues to be the second best or the first best or the third best, we'll see what happens. I think in general, though, it's nice to see Sean Bell is developing these guys really well. You know, Blake Shapen looks improved, and I think Kyron did as well. And you're exactly right. The fastball that he throws, that is something that Kyron does need to work on, his touch. Everything is a bullet, and that was something that kind of Gary struggled with at times. But Kyron's still a young guy, and I think that touch will come, and I enjoyed what I saw. He's got phenomenal arm talent.
I'm going to skip to Brown BW to close out the questions about Kyron and just keep that loop together. Not staff, but my thoughts on Drones. I think everything hinges on this year. If Shapen stays healthy and Drones doesn't get much playing time, he leaves next year. If injury shows its head and Drones takes over, he may stay. So there's just speculation, and like you, I'm not going to really get involved in that. It's game one. If we ran with speculation, Jacob Zeno would have been the starting quarterback the last couple of years. You know what I mean? Yeah. So let's just let it play out. And it doesn't really need to be a conversation following week one. I mean, I understand the conversation on the message boards, but in terms of like the big picture right now, like all that's going to get sorted out eventually. It's not going to get decided after just a game, but I understand the curiosity. A Blue 82, when you look at BYU, what area unit does Baylor have the biggest advantage? Conversely, where's the biggest disadvantage?
Yeah, I think Baylor's biggest advantage is defensive line versus BYU offensive line. I think we saw it last year. They had 5 sacks. They really shut down the BYU running attack. Tyler Algier looked just normal. I mean, 15 for 33 in total. They had 24 carries for 67 yards, and they gave up 5 sacks. I just think Baylor is better up front, and I think they're going to see a much better Gabe Hall on Saturday than they saw a year ago. And I think, Siaki Ika is going to be a beast as well. And I just think in general, this is not a great matchup for BYU up front. Conversely, for Baylor, the biggest disadvantage, it has to be if BYU is healthy at receiver, it's receiver versus cornerback. I think that's where they hold probably the biggest advantage. Now, I'm not saying it's a massive advantage, but I do think it's an advantage. As we saw a year ago when Baylor's corners were even more proven, they still got beat a lot. So we'll see if Baylor can adjust this year.
Yep. Beyond control of the line of scrimmage, do you have an X factor that will look back on the game and say that was secretly the reason we won or lost?
Ooh, beyond controlling the line of scrimmage.
I'd say penalties could be one of those.
Yeah, penalties could be. I was going to say turnovers.
I mean, I think like that kind of goes hand in hand.
True.
When you're on the road, like penalties and turnovers, but outside of your level of play, I think that's where typically you find yourself in the most trouble.
I would also say, third down conversions, putting yourself in position to convert third downs is going to be massive. I just think it's those little things, but if I had to pick one, just kind of looking at the grand scheme of things, I actually think it's going to be red zone efficiency. Who's scoring touchdowns, who's kicking field goals in the red zone, I think will be highly impactful to see who wins this game.
Call your shot. So basically all the things that almost always normally matter, but especially magnified on the road. Penalties, turnovers, goal line, efficiency, red zone efficiency, all those numbers that kind of swing things one way or the other outside of the normal yardage and, things of that nature. Let's see. Call your shot leader in receptions, carries, total yards from scrimmage, tackle, sacks, and I guess everything. Call your shot and everything. Receptions.
Ben Sims.
I'll go with Ben Sims too. Carries.
Tay McWilliams.
I'd say Tay. Total yards from scrimmage.
Monterey Baldwin.
That seems like a safe bet. Tackles.
Dylan Doyle.
I'll go Matt Jones just for the heck of just doing something different. Sacks.
Gabe Hall.
They're not a big sack team, are they? I mean, they can be, but I don't know who else I would throw in there other than Gabe Hall. There's so many choices.
Matt Jones, Dylan Doyle.
Yeah, they all just seem like more tackle for loss guys and sack guys, Matt Jones seems like a safe bet. Yeah, let's go Garmin Randolph. I mean, who cares? I might be right. I might be wrong. I'm not trying to be dismissive, but what does it matter? Garmin Randolph. Interceptions and pass breakups.
Devin Lemire. I think he's going to get tested a lot and have a lot of opportunities to make some plays deep downfield when those corners are tested.
All right, and I'll go with Al Walcott. So there you go. Appreciate you, AF Blue 82. Brown BW, not staff. My thought. Okay, I already read that. Baylor Bear 88. What's the latest on injury status for Nakua and Romney for Saturday? If either is or both is out or limited, what might that mean for Baylor's defensive approach versus BYU?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little earlier, but Kalani Sitake did update a little bit on their status a few days ago. So Nakua, he was on crutches after the game, but he was held out for precautionary reasons. It seems like he could have come back in and played. So by everything that he said, I believe he's going to play and be fine for the game. Romney, the quote was he's close. So we'll see. I think he's probably the more iffy one, but I bet he plays. If they're out, that'd be massive. I think Baylor would just basically game plan to just shut down the run and force whoever the receivers are to beat them, maybe even with one high safety looks. They could. I think they would absolutely feast if those two guys are out. If they're limited, I don't think they'll be limited to the point where they don't look good at all. So I think it'll be the same approach that they would have whether they're 100% healthy or not.
And just a bear in a frog world, spill the beans. What's your favorite tailgate food?
Ooh, that's a good question. Tailgating, I really like nachos. Nachos are kind of where I'm at. You don't get to see them that often. You don't get them that often, but nachos on a game day are pretty terrific.
Yeah, I like off the grill, sausage links, nice juice, especially when you buy juice, that nice juicy sizzle that you get. So that always seems like just all memories come flooding back when I bite into a sausage link hot off the grill at a tailgate. So yeah, that's what comes to mind first for me. And I don't think you really can go too wrong there, whether it's got a little bit of cheese in it or a little bit of jalapeno, whatever concoction. But yeah, that's normally a go-to. So did see a lot of people out there tailgating the other night. I never typically have the opportunity to really scan that scene too much because we're doing the show here and then making our way over. And by the time we get through traffic, it's like kickoff time when I walk through the door. It's like I'm in the elevator and they're almost kicking off already. But it did look, best I could tell, like a pretty fun scene on Saturday. Crowd stayed longer than I anticipated, and I thought everybody had fun, and it was great. So kudos to the game day management staff for making it a setting that people want to just hang out and just watch a blowout commence. not pack up and all be gone by halftime. Certainly some people made their way back, but a good number stayed to the end and made it a fun atmosphere and fun tailgate area as well. So very cool to see that. Passed with flying colors, I think, week number 1, and certainly we're all, I think, nervously anticipating the game this weekend, knowing the impact that it could have on the season, knowing the ramifications, and just knowing the challenge that it is. So very excited to see how the next couple of days play out news-wise, if we get any injury updates or not, and any curveballs, and then we'll see what happens late Saturday night in Provo, Utah. That's one thing that Aranda did point out is sort of one of those disadvantages of those things unique to this game is you're just sitting in your hotel room all day long. I mean, when do you finally head to the stadium? It's like 7:30 at night. You're still in your hotel room. It's like, when do we go, when do you play the football game? And then finally, like 9:30 at night in a time zone that's already an hour behind. Like, that will screw your body up, man. That will screw your thinking up. So that's just another challenge you might not think of. The altitude. I mean, there's these little things that can add up if you're not prepared, but they sound about as well prepared as they could possibly be. So let's get into the Big 12 picks to close this one out, Grayson.
All right, so Big 12 picks for week 2, a big week in the Big 12. Everybody's playing this week and a big week in the non-conference department especially. So the first matchup at 11 a.m. on Fox, Alabama travels to Austin to take on the Texas Longhorns. Who you got in this one, Craig?
Roll Tide. I think Bama should win this one and ultimately win this one pretty handily. It's fun to finally see Quinn Ewers. He was not Superman. But you know what? I'm definitely not expecting Texas to win this game. I don't think we'll hear any Texas back, but this is totally the type of game where they will play well or Alabama will not play all that well, and they'll play close enough, and that will inspire hope and confidence, whether that's based on solid footing or not remains to be seen. So that's, I think, what you're looking for if you're Texas is almost like a moral victory because the actual victory is probably not in line. But, Alabama's got to still go and handle their business, so we'll see what happens. But I definitely believe it will be an Alabama win and handily at that.
Yeah, I got Alabama 44-20. I think Texas will keep it close for 3 quarters. And like you said, I think they're going to push Bama a little bit in this game just because they always get up for some of these massive non-conference games. So I could see it. But ultimately, Bama is just awesome this year. So it's not a great time to play the Tide in my eyes. Next up, Missouri travels to Manhattan to take on Kansas State, also at 11 a.m. on ESPN2. Who you got in this one?
Who's this again?
Missouri at Kansas State.
Big 12 matchup, huh? Kansas State. I'll go with them. Although, the whole big rah-rah debut, they're the hidden team that's going to surprise everybody. I don't think Adrian Martinez really lit the world on fire in his debut. That was more Nebraska than new era Adrian that people were hoping for. Again, it's week number 1, so a lot of knee-jerking, but yeah, Deuce Vaughn's awesome. I think K-State's got a lot of talent. I think this will be an interesting contest, though, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this one shakes out, but I'll go K-State.
Yeah, Missouri hung 52 on Louisiana Tech last week and really blew them out. I think Adrian Martinez is going to have to play a lot better than his 56-yard passing performance that he put on this past weekend. I think Kansas State wins this game. I think they cover the spread, which I believe is 8.5, but I do think when you look at the score during the day, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, we might see an upset here. But I think ultimately Kansas State, the veteran team, I think they get it done 31-21 in what is a somewhat close game. Next on the schedule, Houston.
By the way, Missouri picked off, do you know the quarterback that they played last week?
At Louisiana Tech?
Yeah. Matthew Downing, remember, used to be at TCU a couple years back. Threw 3 picks in that game. Goodness. So, yeah, Missouri feasted on those turnovers.
Well, the next game up, Houston travels to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech. This game's at 3 p.m. on FS1. Houston just knocked off UTSA in what was a thriller, and Tech, on the other hand, destroyed Murray State. But they are without Tyler Shugg for the next 3 to 6 weeks, even though Donovan Smith honestly looked better.
Yeah, dude, this is going to be really hard for me picking Tech games because I almost feel like I talk myself out of what my brain would normally just function and tell me, whether right or wrong. Because here's the deal: is like I feel like I'm too harsh on Tech because I'm viewing it from like a too much of a microscope with Joey McGuire, and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, but also being realistic of like, hey, this wasn't like a build it from scratch project, which I've kind of been repeating over and over again. And then we got close to the season. I'm doing my predictions. I'm like, well, I don't see them really being better than like 8 teams in the Big 12, but I don't see them being terrible either. And so I don't know. I'm kind of battling myself on being too harsh or not harsh enough. But out of last week, I think that Tech's got a really good chance to win this game, primarily because Houston was in a dogfight last week with UTSA, and also because I think Donovan Smith's probably their best quarterback. So now you get rid of the whole who's the quarterback, and the decision was made for you basically. And Donovan Smith goes out there and compiles a handful of touchdowns, throws for 4. He's a big body. He's got a lot of confidence, and I think he might have ultimately been the starter by the end of the year anyway. So I think maybe we just fast forwarded the process a little bit. So I'm going Tech based on just their offense. I think their defense is solid enough. It's going to be in Lubbock. I think the atmosphere is going to be insane. And Houston was, like I said, in a dogfight last week. So I think Houston should win the game. Like if you're like, who's the better team? I think it's Houston. But given all those factors, I think I'm going with Texas Tech here.
And Tech's the favorite by 3 points going into this game, which is rather interesting. I was curious because when we talked to Taylor McCarg last week, he said that the competition he didn't feel like was that close, like that Tyler Shugg was the better quarterback out there, which I found really interesting, especially coming out of the game. And it makes me wonder if maybe what we saw from Donovan Smith isn't actually who he is or who he has been throughout fall camp.
Perhaps.
We'll see on that.
Or they fed him a load of lies.
Or they did. Yeah, you're exactly right. My only issue is Houston gave up 337 yards passing to UTSA a week ago, and Tech is going to throw the ball and throw the ball throw the ball a million times. I think Tech's going to win this game. If you're betting it, just take the over because these two teams are going to put up a lot of points. I like Tech in this one, 38-35. It'll be a good game, though.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there will be some defense played, but ultimately they're just going to run a lot of plays. I think both defenses are actually okay. It's not going to be like one of those just can't stop anybody. I think there will be some stops, but I also think it's just going to be so fast-paced. But maybe they bog it down. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting game. It really is because they could go a variety of different ways, but I do like Tech's ability to win this game, and I'll pick them to win it. It'd be a huge win for McGuire, and I guess I wouldn't be so dumb for basically saying there's no excuse not to be a bowl team this year basically for them. I'll revert back to what I was saying during the offseason because on paper, this wasn't like Matt Rule taking over or Dave Aranda in a COVID year or those types of year ones that you're used to.
Yeah, next game on the schedule, Iowa State travels to Iowa, 3 p.m. on the Big Ten Network. Iowa State, easy win in week 1. Iowa with a weird 7-3 win in which they had 2 safeties and a field goal gave them their 7 points. Who do you got in this one in a series that's been dominated by the Hawkeyes recently?
Matt Campbell, if you don't win this dadgum game this year, did you watch that offense you're playing? 7 points. You know how many touchdowns they scored, Grayson? 0.
Yeah.
They got 7 points thanks to multiple safeties. That is a disgrace. That is an absolute coaching disgrace. I understand that Kirk Ferentz is a lifer, but his son's the OC, and that just further complicates matters. But that is a disgrace in a modern-day college football game, and you're not playing like Georgia's defense to put up 7 points in a football game, and 4 of those came from safeties. A disgrace. Iowa State, if y'all do not win this game, man, I am telling you what, they better win this game. They better win this game.
They're not going to, right?
They better win this game.
They're not going to win.
If they get outscored by freaking Iowa, who couldn't manage more than a field goal last week.
They've lost 6 in a row.
I don't care. They better win this game.
They're not winning this game.
They better win this game.
Yeah, Matt
Hunter
Campbell,
Deckers, I believe in you. Come on.
Yeah, Matt Campbell hasn't been able to win this game in a long time. Since 2014, that's the last time they won this game. And Iowa has had teams that were not as good as Iowa State's team, and they still found a way to win this game. I'm taking Iowa. I think it's going to be a disgusting game. It's going to be hard to watch, but I think Iowa gets it done, and probably I'm going to put just a weird score on it just because I feel like that's the way this game's going to go. I'll put it 19-14, and I'll give Iowa the win.
I have a lot of respect for the career that Kirk Ferentz has carved out, but that is not real football. I mean, that's not even like Pop Warner would say that's good football. Yeah. If we could bring him back, like Red Grange, all those guys, they'd be like, this is awful television.
It is, but they have an elite defense, and it's going to be a problem.
But come on, Iowa State. I mean, come on, seriously. But yeah, I'll go Cyclones, but I totally understand where you're coming from.
Next on the list is Kansas, who looked really, really good in week one. They're traveling to Morgantown to take on West Virginia, coming off of their backyard brawl loss. This game's at 5 p.m. on ESPN+. Who you got?
Gosh, Kansas and West Virginia. I got to go with West Virginia here. I like that Kansas was able to take care of business and do so without a whole lot of drama. West Virginia, I don't think that they're a great team. I still have them in the back end along with Kansas, kind of in that same vicinity. Like Kansas is my last team until they're not the last team anymore. But West Virginia, JT Daniels looked better than he really was because their quarterback play has been so absolutely poor the last couple of seasons, but he's still a good player that I think's got some fun weapons. They got, some good pieces on defense as well. I just think they have more talent overall, and Neil Brown's got to win this game, but I do think Kansas will make it a little fight, though.
Yeah, I think it'll be a solid game. I think ultimately West Virginia will pull away, though. I liked what I saw from Kansas, but that doesn't mean that I think they're a team that's going to consistently go on the road and be in every single game that they play in. So I'll take West Virginia in this one, 37-21. So close, but I think the Mountaineers pull away late. Next game on the list, Kent State goes to Norman to take on the Oklahoma Sooners. This game's at 6 p.m. on ESPN+.
Well, you'll win this. Name your score. They really do have an easy schedule this year on paper. It was fascinating. And look, I had this weird mixture of being not only an OU fan, but also having covered Baylor for so long that I have been able to witness like the whole era of, Baylor being the best offense in the country or arguably the best offense in the country, and seeing the upcoming rise of guys like Jeff Lebby and Kendall Browse and all those guys, and now you see them dispersed around the country. And here's Jeff Lebby now back in the view, back in the Big 12 with Oklahoma, and basically getting to the point of it was just so weird to see OU Twitter last week, and they're like guffawing in the best kind of way over like 30-second touchdown drives, and like all the stuff that basically a decade ago we were talking about with Baylor football is now like they're new, right? And it's just kind of funny to see that all come back swinging around, all these years later, to where now they're running the Baylor offense, so to speak. But yeah, I think that they'll name their score here. They're not going to be challenged week in and week out with this schedule, and they'll be able to have some games like this where they just kind of do your typical like 67-14, and the game lasts 4 hours, and everybody's got 100 yards receiving and rushing, and the box score is crazy. And you walk away after 4.5 hours of a blowout, and you're like, that was fun, cool. I mean, that's what I expect.
Yeah, I liked what I saw from Oklahoma in week one. I felt like their defense had more of an identity. They just looked more solid, and offensively they ran the ball well. Eric Gray looked far improved from what he was a year ago, which was nice to see. So I got Oklahoma winning this one 48-17. I think it'll be another easy win, just like last weekend.
Yeah, they're going to blow them out. I think the spread's like 5-6 touchdowns at this point. Yeah. I just wonder how much like Baylor of the old days are they going to be? Like, can they keep up the defensive end of the bargain and have a nice balance, but can they also avoid the pitfalls of penalty issues and some of those bugaboos that
games when they can't run the ball?
What happens? Like, can anybody even force them into that situation? But yeah, right out of the gates, absolutely, they look like a threat. They got a really nasty offense and defense, on paper, and so we'll see. But this week's not going to be a game that will really tell us a whole lot.
Nope. Next game on the list, Arizona State traveling to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State. This game's at 6:30 on ESPN2. Oklahoma State gave up a lot of points in week one. Do you think that's kind of who they are?
I think that's, a little bit of who they are when you lose Jim Knowles. I think that there's naturally going to be some regression. You look at what he did with Ohio State already. He's already, making some fans out there in Columbus, Ohio. But yeah, I think that just king of adjustments, right? Jim Knowles. But I think that, there's going to be a little bit of a step back even when you bring in a Derek Mason. I also think that they are who we thought they were. And this is the Spencer Sanders show, right? So there's going to be great segments and there's going to be bad segments. And I think, last week they were coasting, and then a few things go wrong, and all of a sudden they're scrambling to secure a win at the end. But I'll take them in this game. Arizona State is a dysfunctional program at the moment. I understand they got to win in week number 1, but give me the Cowboys all day long in this one.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma State's getting too much flack for what happened in that game. It was 51-15.
They were crushing them. It was over.
It was over. They brought in the backups for a little bit as well, and then had to bring Spencer Sanders back in. But also, don't forget, Central Michigan was 9-4 last year. Mm-hmm. They were not a bad team, and Oklahoma State was absolutely routing them. I think people are getting too caught up in that and are thinking, ooh, Arizona State, sneaky. They're going to come in and beat Oklahoma State in a road game at night in Stillwater. It's not going to happen. No. Oklahoma State's going to blow them out. I got it probably something like 41-20. I think Oklahoma State handles business in this game.
They got close because at the end, Central Michigan outscored them 22-7 in the fourth quarter, but they still lost by 14 points.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how close was it really? I mean, it was close enough to have a little bit of a panic, but not like they were on the goal line with time running out to try and win the game.
Not at all. Next game is kind of a snoozer. Tarleton travels to TCU to take on the Horned Frogs. This game's at 7 p.m. on ESPN+.
I was kind of surprised at how much TCU struggled offensively. I mean, credit to Colorado a bit, but, you know, obviously now they've been forced to hand as far as the quarterback situation with the injury. So I'll be interested to see kind of how the TCU offense looks this week, because they're kind of hard to peg exactly who they are just yet, because it's all very new and they were definitely feeling their way around. You know, Darius Davis is obviously a good player, like, you know, some of the names, but yeah, Colorado's not very good at all. So I don't know really how much I learned about TCU last week.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I know this game's going to be a blowout. 62-7 is kind of my thought process, but you're right. Sure. You know, what do we know about TCU yet? I don't think we know a ton. We'll know more soon, though, because they have SMU very soon, and SMU looked like a team that is going to pose some problems for them. Final game on the slate, game of the week, Baylor travels to Provo to take on BYU, 9:15 kickoff on ESPN.
I'm going Baylor. I just think they're, you know, the better team. The only thing that gives me pause is night game, Provo, you know, just different time zones, different environment, different this, different that, different challenges. But, you know, place this game in Waco, it's not even a question in my brain. Place it in Provo, it's only a slight pause before I immediately go back to Baylor winning this football game. I do think it's going to be a war. I think it's going to be, you know, they're going to walk out of this with some bumps and bruises for sure, but I do think they walk out with their hand raised.
Yeah, I think so too. I got Baylor winning this one 34-27. I do think Baylor wins this game by at least a touchdown. I just think they're the better team, and they're so similar to BYU. They just are better and have more talent. And I think ultimately people are really going to learn about Baylor's defensive line in this game. I think they're going to dominate BYU up front, so it's going to be they're going to be very reliant on Jaron Hall to make a lot of throws, and I think eventually they're going to run into problems and maybe have a turnover or two that Baylor capitalizes on. So, yeah, I like the Bears to win this one as well.
All right, and whether they do or whether they don't, we will be back here next week to talk about it. Either a 1-1 Baylor team that's going to have to like look in the mirror after a disappointing loss on the road because they're not expecting to lose any this year, or, you know, anticipating losing any, of course, or they're going to come back, they're going to be 2-0 with a massive top 25 win right out of the gates. So that's kind of the direction they'll take. And obviously, most important thing other than, you know, getting a W is, you know, staying healthy, and we'll see how they can come out of that that trip and how they look on the other end of it. But, man, just really kind of already ready for it, because you kind of know what's on the line, and yet we still have another 4 days to go before we get to see this. So going to have to be patient, which will be tough, but plenty of other things to talk about. Did want to mention before we go the sad news about the passing of Guy Morris that was announced on Tuesday morning. Passed away, apparently, the former Baylor head football coach after a battle with Alzheimer's, which is just the absolute worst. Knowing people who have dealt with that in their lives, just don't wish that on anybody. So obviously a big outpouring of support for Guy Morris all over social media today, and I just want to wish his family the absolute best in a very trying time. He was the head coach from 2003 to 2007 in Waco, and was obviously just all over the game of football in general, all over the country, all over the map, all over the different ranks. But he did have a bit of time in Waco, Colorado City native. So salute to him and rest in peace.
Yeah, really sad story there. So, yeah, prayers for his family, of course, and just, sad time, but but also, good to honor his memory right now.
Absolutely. So, there's a lot to look forward to, a lot on the boards, a lot of articles, a lot of, I don't know, Grayson, you tell me, a lot of things for people to look forward to.
Tons of articles, tons of content on the premium side of things. We just are churning out content thanks to all of our writers and, of course, Jack, who edits pretty much everything, and Colt as well, and just, managing everything and making sure we have tons of content for you on the premium side. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. I promise you'll enjoy it. And then also 365 Sports Radio, Monday through Friday, 3 to 6, tons of news and interviews. And if you want to just hear more college football takes and information and news, that is definitely the place to go.
Yeah, it seems like we'll start to deviate a bit away from all of the recurring realignment chatter now that the season's here, and that started dissipating. It even looks like the Big Ten's may be backing away from some of that now, which is nice, that you can just kind of let the games be played. So it was fun and refreshing to have that going on, but of course it's college football, so whether it's that or it's some new rule passing or some new playoff idea or whatever, there's always something to talk about these days with college football, and I'm just glad that a lot of the conversation is going to be based on things like what we saw over the weekend. So great to have it back. Great to have a full crew here behind the scenes helping us out with Garrett, Jack, and Jacob here today. Thank you to Grayson Grunhafer, and definitely check out Sic'Em365.com for all your Baylor athletics news, notes, and conversation. Hopefully you'll join the premium section. It's a good way to support the site and support the show and support all that we do. But until next time, for Grayson and the rest of the guys, I'm Craig Smoke. This has been the Bearcast on 365 Sports, Sic'Em365.com.